Court records from the Arkansas frontier tell of a woman whose very name made plantation owners fall silent. Eliza Carr, a name whispered with equal parts dread and fascination across 4 counties, stood trial not once, but 4 separate times between 1847 and 1856. Each trial involved the same peculiar charge: grievous assault upon the person of her lawful master. Each time, the courtroom was cleared of women and children before testimony began. And each time, despite overwhelming evidence, no jury would convict her. The wounds she inflicted were too specific, too deliberate, too permanent. 3 men lost their ability to father children. A 4th lost something else entirely: his sanity, they said, though the official record merely listed severe trauma requiring medical supervision. Authorities knew what she'd done. The townspeople knew. But something about Eliza's cases made even hardened frontier judges look away. What could drive a legal system built upon absolute control to repeatedly release its most dangerous prisoner? Before we continue with the story of Eliza Carr, I need you to do something. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Because stories like this, ones buried in forgotten archives, surface rarely. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to know how far these forgotten histories travel. Now, let's discover what made Eliza Carr so dangerous that even her owners hesitated to write her name on paper. The question of what made Eliza wasn't answered by her appearance. Those who saw her never forgot. She stood barely over 5 feet tall, with hands that looked too delicate for the cotton rows where she had spent most of her 32 years. Her face bore a single unmistakable mark, a thin scar running from her right temple to her jaw, given by an overseer's whip when she was 14. But it was her eyes people remembered most. They didn't hold the downcast resignation expected of a woman in her position. They observed, they calculated, they remembered. Eliza was born in 1824 on a tobacco farm near Huntsville, Alabama, the daughter of a woman whose name was never written in any ledger. Her first owner, Samuel Cartwright, was what the community considered reasonable. He fed his workers adequately, punished only when drunk, and occasionally allowed marriages among the enslaved. Eliza learned to read by watching Cartwright's teenage daughter practice her letters, memorizing strokes through a crack in the parlor wall. This illegal, dangerous education would later prove essential. When Cartwright died in 1842, gambling debts consumed his estate. Eliza, 18, strong, literate, was sold to a cotton trader named Thomas Brackett for $900, a price reflecting both her labor and what Brackett called her refined bearing. The sale tore her from her mother, her 2 younger brothers, and every familiar place she'd known. The journey west into Arkansas Territory took 6 weeks in a chained wagon with 15 others, watching the landscape shift from dense green hills to endless plains. Arkansas Territory in 1842 was a place stuck between worlds, nominally frontier, yet increasingly colonized by planters fleeing depleted soils in older southern states. Choctaw and Cherokee communities intermingled uneasily with Methodist missionaries, traders, federal troops, and settlers hunting land and opportunity. Towns like Van Buren and Fort Smith acted as administrative crossroads where territorial law, tribal sovereignty, and federal interests collided unpredictably. Brackett's plantation sat 12 miles south of Fort Smith in what is now Sebastian County. 200 acres of cotton and corn, worked by 39 people housed in a row of shingled cabins behind the main house. The overseer, Calvin Yates, a thick-necked Georgian with a voice like a dropped anchor, ran the place with mechanical brutality. 20 lashes for talking during work, 30 for leaving the rows without permission, 50 for striking back. Punishments were public every Saturday after sundown, a ritualized reminder of where power lived. Eliza spent her first months keeping her head down and her literacy hidden. She picked cotton with measured steadiness, never fastest, never slowest. She learned which workers could be trusted and which traded secrets for extra rations. She learned that Brackett visited the cabins on Thursday nights when his wife traveled to stay with her sister in Fort Smith. She also learned that Yates preferred young women, those who had not yet inherited the hollow-eyed indifference that came after years of attention. She also learned that Mrs. Brackett, Eleanor, knew everything but cared nothing. Eleanor Brackett had been a Savannah belle raised among silver tea sets and expectations. At 33, childless and addicted to laudanum, she spent afternoons playing the same 3 waltzes on her rosewood piano until the notes seemed carved into the walls. She drifted through that house like a ghost, and if she heard her husband's boots creak down the walkway towards the cabins on Thursday nights, she gave no sign. The first incident occurred on a cold Thursday in late November 1842, 5 months after Eliza arrived. Thomas Brackett appeared at her cabin door just after 10, when most of the laborers had collapsed from exhaustion. He carried no lantern. He didn't need one. Eliza was awake because Thursdays had a particular quietness, a kind that made the night itself seem complicit. The other women in the cabin did not turn their heads when he entered. That was the rule. See nothing, hear nothing, know nothing. Brackett stood over Eliza's pallet, smelling of whiskey and pomade, breath heavy. When he touched her shoulder, she didn't flinch. She simply whispered, "Touch me again, and I'll end you." He laughed quietly, amused like she'd said something charming. His hand slid from her shoulder to her throat. Not squeezing, just resting there, an assertion of ownership. What happened next took 3 seconds, though no witness could later explain it clearly. Eliza's hand emerged from beneath her blanket, gripping something metal. A sharp motion, a gasp like the air had been punched out of him. Brackett staggered back, blood darkening his trousers with shocking speed. Eliza rose, walked past him into the cold night, the gin house cotton knife still in her hand. She walked to the main house's porch, knocked with the calmness of someone delivering a telegram. Pupils pinpricked from laudanum, gaze eerily serene. Eliza held out the bloodied knife, handle first. "Your husband tried to force himself on me. I've injured him. He's in cabin 3. He'll need a doctor." Then she sat on the porch steps and waited for whatever came next. What came next was a series of events that Arkansas Territory officials would discuss in hushed tones for years. Dr. Jeremiah Fulton, roused from bed near midnight, rode 11 miles in freezing darkness to tend to an injury he would later refuse to describe in plain language. Fulton arrived to find Thomas Brackett pale, shaking, and barely conscious, while Eleanor sat in the parlor playing the same 3 waltzes on her piano as if nothing whatsoever had occurred. Eliza waited outside with her hands folded in her lap like a woman expecting salvation or execution. The legal question, what to do with her, became Arkansas Territory's most uncomfortable dilemma. Law was clear. An enslaved woman who maimed her master faced execution. But the nature of the injury, the circumstances of his visit, the fact that Eliza had turned herself in, all complicated matters profoundly. Even the most pro-slavery officials balked at describing the injury out loud in court. No man wanted his name associated with defending Thomas Brackett's rights in this particular manner. The presiding judge, Nathaniel Barrow, a Virginian by birth and a man who'd spent 2 decades arbitrating conflicts between settlers, tribal authorities, and military officials, was no stranger to impossible cases. But Eliza's forced him into territory beyond anything he had ever ruled on. He interviewed her privately in the courthouse at Fort Smith, a conversation never formally recorded, though clerks later repeated fragments. Eliza answered every question plainly. Yes, she'd taken the knife 2 weeks beforehand, anticipating Brackett's visit. Yes, she knew exactly where to cut so the wound would be permanent but not fatal. No, she felt no remorse. When Barrow asked why she chose that particular form of punishment, her reply chilled him. To keep him from doing to anyone else what he tried to do to me. The trial lasted a single day. Brackett did not appear. officially due to medical recovery, unofficially because he could not bear having the details of his mutilation read aloud. Yates testified that Eliza was insolent and prone to unnatural defiance. Dr. Fulton described the injury in strictly clinical terms. Eleanor Brackett sat silently in the audience, face expressionless, fingers twitching as though playing phantom piano keys. The defense came from an unexpected place. Isaac Redbird, a Choctaw delegate, stood and argued that under Choctaw law, which still held partial jurisdiction in the region, Eliza's actions constituted self-defense against sexual assault. His standing to speak was questionable. His presence was unprecedented, yet Judge Barrow allowed it. The all-white jury deliberated for 8 hours. When they returned, they simply said, "Not guilty." Territorial prosecutors erupted in outrage. Letters flooded in from plantation owners demanding a retrial. A fiery sermon in the Fort Smith Gazette warned that acquitting Eliza would encourage rebellion, but Judge Barrow upheld the verdict. Brackett, humiliated and unwilling to sleep another night under the same roof as the woman who had unmanned him, sold her immediately. Her new owner was Silas Thornton, a widowed farmer who kept a modest operation 20 miles west of Fort Smith. Thornton had a reputation for being fair, the kind of master who quoted scripture often and loudly. He bought her for $650, far less than Brackett had paid, citing her diminished value due to criminal tendencies.
She had been on Thornton's property for barely 4 months when it happened again. The pattern that would later define her life repeated itself almost perfectly. A late-night visit, an attempted assault, and Eliza's precise countermeasure. This time, the weapon was a straight razor she had stolen from Thornton's shaving kit, tucked beneath his bed during her turn cleaning the main house. Thornton survived, with slightly better prospects than Brackett. Fulton, once again summoned, noted in his private journal that the damage, though extensive, was not wholly catastrophic. Thornton's neighbors whispered, half in horror, half in disbelief, wondering how a man could buy a woman with such a history and still visit her cabin alone. The second trial drew a larger crowd. People traveled from as far as Little Rock to witness it. By now, Eliza's name had become a dark legend whispered across taverns, camps, and courthouses. She was no longer merely a defendant. She was a symbol, a question, a threat. This time, Eliza testified. Barrow allowed it over the prosecutor's furious objections. For 2 hours, she described her life with sharp, painful clarity. The sale that separated her from her mother, Brackett's Thursday night visits, the silent dread that descended over the women in the cabin each week, the way they pretended to sleep so completely they might as well have been corpses. She explained that after Brackett, she believed her reputation would protect her from future abuse. "I thought," she said, looking each juror in the eye, "that once a man knew what I was capable of, he would choose differently. I was wrong. Mr. Thornton bought me knowing full well what happened to Mr. Brackett." The prosecutor, a red-faced man named Hiram Caldwell, demanded to know whether she regretted her actions. Her answer would be printed in newspapers across the South. "I regret that it was necessary. I do not regret defending myself." The jury deliberated 11 hours. They returned with the same verdict, not guilty. Thornton sold her the next morning for $425, eager to expel her from his life like a curse he feared might strike again. Her new owner, Elias Booker, believed himself immune to danger. He owned a cotton gin and a small mill near the Arkansas River, employing only 3 laborers. Booker prided himself on being a progressive master, allowing small wages, garden plots, supervised prayer meetings. He assumed Eliza would be grateful. 9 months later, she cut him too. Same pattern, same precision, same result. Dr. Fulton, summoned for the 3rd time to treat an injury he now recognized instantly, wrote in his journal that Eliza's technique showed a level of anatomical understanding unusual even among medical apprentices. Booker survived, though the injury left him permanently unable to father children. His pride suffered a wound even deeper than the one inflicted by her blade. But this time, Eliza's act triggered something larger than a private scandal. It ignited a fire across Arkansas territory. By Eliza's third trial, her story was no longer a local aberration. It had become an issue of national interest. Abolitionist papers in Boston published editorials calling her the Arkansas Joan of Arc. Southern papers demanded her execution, warning that if her behavior went unpunished, no master across the South would be safe at night. Preachers thundered that her acquittals were a sign of moral decay. The courtroom overflowed. People climbed trees outside to look through windows. Drummers and peddlers lined the streets. Federal marshals were stationed along the courthouse walls. Even Judge Barrow's steady voice trembled slightly as he read the charges. This time, the prosecutor attempted a very different strategy. He called 3 doctors to describe the injuries in graphic detail, hoping revulsion would break the pattern of acquittals. Booker himself testified, though his face remained fixed in a hard, furious mask, giving little away. Through it all, Eliza remained calm, hands folded neatly, her expression unreadable. And once again, the defense drew strength from an unexpected place. A Methodist preacher from Ohio, in town on missionary business, stood and offered character testimony, not about Eliza herself, whom she had never met, but about the pattern of nighttime assaults across plantations. Though he was nearly thrown out for abolitionist tendencies, his words lingered in the air long after he had been silenced. After a 15-hour deliberation, the jury returned its verdict, not guilty. Booker's reaction shocked everyone. Instead of selling her at a discount, he freed her outright. Manumission papers filed in December 1851 stated only irreconcilable differences of temperament. He gave her $70, nearly a year's wages, and secured her passage to Fort Smith, where a small free black community had taken root along the river. Eliza moved into a cramped room above a dry goods store and began sewing for a living. She attended evening literacy classes taught by a Quaker woman who asked no questions. She learned faster than any student the teacher had ever taken. In quiet hours, she watched the river from her window, always turning her face away from Arkansas territory, as if refusing to look backward. For 3 years, she lived without incident, without violence. Some women in Fort Smith whispered that she might start over, build a life, forget the past, and perhaps she believed that too. But in May of 1854, she returned. She walked the 40 miles back into Arkansas territory and presented herself at the courthouse in Fort Smith. She had not been charged with anything. She was not summoned or sought. She came by choice. She came to testify at the trial of another woman. That woman was Hannah Price, 19 years old, charged with striking her master with a fire poker. The master survived with a broken collarbone. His attorney claimed he had simply checked on reports of fever in Hannah's cabin. Hannah claimed he forced his way in. Her case, unlike Eliza's, was not straightforward. Eliza's entrance into the courtroom froze the room. Conversations died mid-syllable. Quills paused in mid-air. Judge Barrow, now 62, weary-eyed and slower in his motions, initially refused to allow her testimony. She was not witness to the event. She has no standing here. But Eliza had not come unprepared. She carried an envelope thick with documents, 4 years of letters from women across 3 territories, describing attempts at assault, patterns of nighttime visits, acts of self-defense, flights for safety, and the legal outcomes that followed. Some letters were from free women, some smuggled from plantations by riders who risked their lives carrying them. All had been copied or summarized in Eliza's careful hand.
She had been building a network, a record, a map of abuse and retaliation that no court had ever acknowledged, not because it didn't exist, but because no one had ever dared to collect it. Judge Barrow sat in chambers for nearly an hour reading the letters. What he read disturbed him deeply enough that he made a decision that stunned the courtroom. He allowed Eliza to testify as an expert in self-defense and sexual coercion. It was the first time in territorial history that an enslaved or formerly enslaved woman was recognized as an expert witness. The prosecutor raged. The territorial attorney general threatened to file charges against Barrow. Plantation owners in the gallery muttered curses, but the judge's gavel fell like a warning. The decision was final. Eliza testified for 3 days. She spoke with a calmness that unsettled even her supporters. She described the time patterns of assaults, the late-night hours when wives were visiting relatives, when moonlight was dim, when overseers walked patrols that conveniently looked the other way. She described warning systems enslaved women created, tapping on walls, coughing signals, whispered alerts. She described the anatomy of self-defense, why certain cuts ended violence quickly, why precision mattered when strength could never be equal. The prosecutor tried repeatedly to bait her. He demanded she admit to plotting the attacks ahead of time, that she had taught other women to mutilate, that she had planned a conspiracy. Each time she answered the same. I prepared because I feared what men might do. Preparing to defend myself is not the same as planning to attack. Her testimony electrified the jury. For the first time, they understood not just a single event, but an entire pattern that had existed hidden in plain sight. Hannah was acquitted after 19 hours of deadlock. The foreman later told a reporter, "It was not that we believed Hannah innocent, it was that we finally understood the world she lived in." News of the verdict spread like wildfire. Soon after, something remarkable happened. Women began seeking Eliza out at night. Enslaved women, free women, married women. They came quietly, traveling miles through forests and back roads. They came with questions about surviving, about protecting themselves, about what the courts might or might not allow. Eliza taught them in the same way she had always acted, calmly, methodically, without embellishment. She drew diagrams in ash, explained pressure points, described ways to signal danger. She never told anyone to attack. She only told them how to survive. The plantation owners noticed. Between 1854 and 1856, 9 incidents occurred across Arkansas and Choctaw territories, women striking back with precision far beyond coincidence. Something had begun, and the men in power wanted it ended.
By the winter of 1855, Eliza's name carried a power that terrified the men who once believed themselves untouchable. Plantation owners began holding meetings, quiet ones, behind shut doors and locked shutters, discussing how a single, formerly enslaved woman had disrupted the unspoken rules of their world. Newspapers in Little Rock and Memphis ran editorials accusing her of unnatural influence and stoking dissidence among the lower class. One paper even claimed she was building an army, though no such thing existed. Fear shaped rumors faster than truth ever could. By then, Eliza lived in Fort Smith, sewing by day and teaching reading lessons to children of the small free black community at night. She never sought attention and rarely left town except when summoned by someone in danger. Her life was simple, quiet, almost monastic. But the myth around her grew louder than her reality. When the 9th incident occurred, a woman named Clara striking her overseer with a broken mule bit, leaving him permanently disfigured, the territorial authorities acted. They blamed Eliza immediately, though she had never met Clara, never visited the plantation, never set foot in that county. The governor issued an order for her arrest. Federal marshals surrounded Fort Smith before dawn on January 19, 1856. They waited until the children she taught arrived at the little church schoolhouse, then entered quietly, hats removed, as if embarrassed by the task they'd been given. Eliza didn't resist. She folded her hands, nodded at the children, some of whom began to cry, and walked out between the marshals without saying a word. Her arrest sent shockwaves across the region. The free black community feared the worst. White townspeople were split. Some believed she had brought trouble upon herself. Others believed she had been singled out because she exposed a truth nobody wished to face. Newspapers printed embellished accounts of her past, inventing details to make her seem monstrous. None of it matched the real Eliza, who spent her first night in custody reading Psalms from a borrowed Bible. Her fourth trial would become the most contentious proceeding Arkansas had ever seen. Judge Barrow, weary and frail now, petitioned to remove himself from the case, but territorial law prevented him from doing so. He presided with tremors in his hands and shadows beneath his eyes, knowing that this trial was not about facts, but about fear. The courtroom overflowed again, this time not with curiosity seekers, but with men determined to make an example of her. Women were barred entirely. Federal troops stood guard outside. The formal charge was inciting violent rebellion across multiple counties. It was a charge invented solely for her. No precedent, no definition, no boundaries. The prosecutor, now the territorial attorney general himself, paced like a man who believed this trial would elevate him to national office. He painted Eliza not as a victim or a survivor, but as a mastermind who had turned the entire female population into a weapon. He waved the 9 testimonies from women who had defended themselves and shouted at the jury, "All of this traces back to her." He gestured toward Eliza, seated quietly at the defendant's table. "She is the serpent in our garden, the threat to every decent household, a woman who teaches others to mutilate." Even the jury winced at the word. Then Eliza stood to testify. She insisted on it. Against her lawyer's pleas, she walked slowly to the witness stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The courtroom fell silent, not respectfully, but like animals waiting for a break in the brush. Her voice was steady. "I did not visit the plantation where Clara lived. I never told her what to do. I know nothing about her life except what was printed in the paper." The prosecutor moved to interrupt, but Judge Barrow held up a shaking hand. Eliza continued, "But I will not pretend that the women you fear so much learned this from me. They learned it from years of surviving men like you." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom like a storm wind. "These women did not fight because I told them to. They fought because they were given no other choice. And if you want to blame someone for what they did, blame the ones who forced their hands."
The prosecutor slammed his fist on the table. "You admit you taught them." "I taught survival," she replied, "not rebellion. If teaching someone how to keep themselves alive is rebellion, then the fault lies not with the teacher, but with the world that made such lessons necessary." Her words cut the room into 2 camps, those who were furious and those who were shaken. But the trial was not truly about truth. It was about crushing the symbol she had become. For 2 weeks, the prosecution called witnesses, plantation owners, overseers, doctors, even a minister who claimed that the devil's whisper is softest in the ears of disobedient women.
They presented no direct evidence tying Eliza to Clara or to any of the 9 incidents, but they didn't need to. Their strategy was fear, not proof. The defense called no witnesses. Eliza refused to allow any woman she had ever helped to appear in court. "They've risked enough," she said. The jury was dismissed for deliberation on the 15th day of trial. What happened next became a legend. Hours passed, then a full day, then 2. The jurors sent word they were hopelessly deadlocked. Judge Barrow, sick and sweating, refused to declare a mistrial, knowing that a retrial would only multiply the danger. He ordered the jury to continue deliberating. On the 3rd day, the jury returned, quietly, faces drawn tight. The foreman stood. "We cannot reach a unanimous verdict." Barrow paused. Everyone leaned forward. The prosecutor was halfway out of his chair, preparing to demand a retrial, but the judge spoke first. "In such cases," he said, voice cracking, "territorial law grants the court discretion." He looked at Eliza, and his eyes softened. "Ms. Carr, this court finds that no sufficient evidence exists to convict you of the charges brought." Gasps filled the room. The prosecutor shouted in protest. Plantation owners surged to their feet. Soldiers stepped forward, hands on weapons. Barrow's gavel struck the bench. A feeble blow, but enough. "Eliza Carr is released. This case is closed." The room erupted into chaos. Some men shouted threats, others spat, but a few, quietly, quickly, left the courtroom with a different expression. Not anger, not fear, respect. Eliza walked out of the courthouse with the same calm she had shown in every trial, though she knew what came next would not be simple. Men who had lost influence because of her would not forget, nor would those who saw her acquittal as an insult to their authority. 2 nights later, flames lit the sky over Fort Smith. Someone, no one was ever formally named, set fire to the home where she lived. The building burned to the ground before midnight. Neighbors rushed with buckets from the river, shouting her name. When the fire consumed the last of the roof and the embers died down, they searched the ruins. She was gone. No body, no footprints, no trace. Just gone. By dawn, rumors spread faster than smoke. Some claimed she'd been kidnapped. Others swore she walked calmly toward the river before the flames began. A few whispered she crossed into Choctaw territory to live under their protection, and some believed she'd simply vanished into the wilderness, living free on her own terms at last. But none of that can be proven. All we knew for certain is this: the most dangerous woman Arkansas ever feared did not die that night. She disappeared. In the months following the fire, her name transformed from scandal to legend. Stories about Eliza Carr drifted through taverns, camps, riverboats, and trading posts. No 2 versions the same, but all carrying the same core: a woman who had defied the rules of the South and lived. Some claimed they saw her riding west with a band of Cherokee traders. Others swore she appeared in Kansas territory, helping fugitives cross into free soil. A soldier stationed at Fort Smith insisted he saw her from a distance, standing beneath the bent sycamore near the riverbank, watching the town burn behind her without a flicker of emotion. Though every man swore he saw her, none could give details that matched another's account. By spring of 1856, Eliza's absence unsettled Arkansas more than her presence ever had. Plantation owners traveled in groups now, never alone. Overseers carried pistols at night instead of whips. Women, white and black alike, walked with a new stillness in their posture, a new watchfulness in their eyes. It wasn't rebellion, it was something quieter, deeper, realization. The kind that grows outward, not upward.
Some families sent daughters east for schooling, though rumors said fear, not education, guided those decisions. Even sermons changed tone. Ministers warned not just of sin, but of consequence, hinting, without saying the words, that God might tolerate suffering only so long before sending a reckoning. But the men who feared Eliza the most were not the ones whose homes she'd burned or whose pride she'd wounded. The ones who feared her were the men who'd never met her at all. Because if a single woman could unravel their authority, what happened when others followed? Meanwhile, far from the panic she unknowingly stirred, Eliza walked west. Her exact path is uncertain, pieced together only through fragments of second-hand testimony decades later. A Choctaw farmer claimed she stayed 2 nights in his family's barn, paying for lodging with sewing repairs. A trapper recalled seeing a quiet, sharp-eyed woman matching her description crossing the Poteau River just before sunrise. A group of missionaries near the Arkansas Indian Territory line reported a woman attending their evening prayers, sitting in the back row, leaving before the final hymn ended.
Beyond those glimpses, her trail vanished. But one detail repeated across every account. She never ran. She walked, as though she had never feared the men who hunted her, only pitied them. By the summer of that same year, a series of strange occurrences began in small settlements between Fort Scott and Fort Gibson. Women reported that a stranger visited them at night, never entering their homes, just tapping lightly on the shutters or knocking quietly on doors. When they opened, they found a folded piece of cloth or a torn scrap of paper containing small diagrams, pressure points, defensive angles, instructions on where to strike if cornered. The handwriting varied, a deliberate disguise, but the careful curves of the letters reminded some of Eliza's courtroom notes. Others claimed the stranger said nothing, just offered the cloth and walked away into the trees. Sometimes the cloth contained a short message, "Remember your worth," or "Strength is not sin." For many settlers, especially in the isolated pockets near Kansas Territory, these quiet visits were the only reminder that someone understood their fear. The courts wouldn't help them. The church couldn't help them. But the stranger, whoever she was, taught them what Eliza had taught before, that survival was not defiance. It was necessity. Rumors grew. Some said the stranger was a ghost, Eliza's spirit haunting the countryside. Others said she was alive, but protected by tribal allies who refused to hand her over. Men searching for her found nothing but empty barns, extinguished campfires, and the sense that they were being watched from the tree line. By late 1856, the territory descended into a kind of uneasy silence. The attacks on overseers stopped. Self-defense incidents dropped sharply. Women spoke less often about the stranger's visits, fearing retaliation or disbelief. But the effects lingered. A tension in households, a shift in how men handled their authority, a quiet knowledge that the world had changed, even if nobody dared to say it. Meanwhile, in Fort Smith, Judge Barrow began writing a series of confidential letters to a friend in Virginia. In them, he expressed the belief that Eliza was still alive and close. He wrote that her 4th trial had awakened something in him, a feeling he hadn't known since the days when he arbitrated Cherokee disputes in his youth. He wrote, "We have built our courts upon sand. She merely pointed to the tide." 2 weeks after his final letter, Judge Barrow abruptly retired, claiming failing health. But a clerk overheard him say something far stranger to a colleague before he left the courthouse for the last time. "If she lives, then justice has not failed." In the fall of that same year, a young man named Peter Holt, barely 22 and new to the Territorial Marshal Service, filed a report that senior officers suppressed almost immediately.
Holt described encountering a group of Cherokee women escorting someone through the dense woods near the Illinois River. The women shielded their companion's face, but Holt swore he recognized her posture, the straightness of her back, the way she scanned the treetops before walking. When he tried to question the group, an elder stepped forward and said calmly, "This woman is beyond your reach." Holt wrote that he felt no threat from them, only certainty. Whether this was true or embellished, the report disappeared into a locked drawer before it could be copied. Holt was reassigned to a distant post. Whatever he saw, or believed he saw, slipped into unofficial lore. Years passed. By 1857, the legend of Eliza Carr softened at the edges. Travelers still told her story, though details changed with each retelling. Some said she lived in a hidden cabin near the foothills, teaching women to read by lantern light. Others said she crossed into Kansas territory to join abolitionist networks. A few believed she reached Missouri, working at a women's refuge under a false name. None of these claims were confirmed. Yet one thing remained consistent. Wherever her story traveled, fear followed for some, hope for others. Women named daughters after her. Men avoided dark paths near the river. And across Arkansas, 3 plantation owners, Brackett, Thornton, and Booker, lived with scars that reminded them daily of what she had taken and what she had refused to give. But her story was not finished, because in 1858, 2 years after she vanished, something happened that brought her legend roaring back to life.
It began quietly, almost too quietly to matter. Just a single line in the Fort Smith Herald, printed near the bottom of page 3. Unidentified woman found along the southern bank of the Arkansas River, refused to give name. Most readers skimmed past it. Strangers turned up all the time. Runaways, travelers who'd lost their way, widows seeking new places to rebuild. But what caught the attention of those who read carefully was the description. Mid-30s, small in stature, scar across the right side of her face. The scar was what made people pause. 2 days later, a trader from Van Buren claimed he saw the same woman sitting alone beneath a cottonwood, sewing with deliberate, practiced motions. When he approached, she stood without a word and walked into the woods, leaving behind only a length of carefully stitched fabric. He didn't recognize her, not truly, but he recognized the calm, the precision, the quiet intensity. Others began reporting similar sightings, never close, never long, always fleeting. A woman catching fish along the riverbank at dawn, a solitary figure walking west at dusk, someone matching her description attending a sermon from the back door of a church, leaving before the blessing. Rumors spread again, thicker than the smoke that once filled the sky above Fort Smith on the night her home burned. But the moment that pushed her legend into full resurgence happened in the spring of 1858. A letter arrived at Judge Barrow's home. He had retired a year earlier and lived near the outskirts of town, body weakened but mind sharper than ever. His housekeeper found the letter on the porch, tucked between the slats of the rocking chair where the judge often sat in the mornings. There was no stamp, no seal, no name on the outside. Inside was a folded square of cloth, plain muslin, hand-stitched with a meticulousness Barrow recognized instantly. Along with it was a short note, written in the careful, curved handwriting he had seen across so many court documents. "I am alive. I harmed no one who did not first intend harm. Teach them what you could not say in court." It was unsigned. It didn't need to be. Barrow sat in his rocking chair for nearly an hour, staring at the words, gripping the cloth in trembling fingers. When he finally rose, he walked to his desk, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and began writing what he would later call the Barrow Papers. These writings, never published, hidden for decades, were a series of essays on law, morality, and the systemic violence that courts refused to acknowledge. They weren't abolitionists, not exactly, but they were a crack in the wall, a breach. And that breach widened, because the same week Barrow received his letter, something far more dramatic occurred 40 miles south, near the outskirts of Greenwood. A man named Abner Cole, a notorious overseer known for his cruelty, was found unconscious behind the barn of the plantation where he worked. His injuries were deliberate, almost clinical, not life-threatening, but humiliating in a very familiar way. The plantation owner swore he heard a woman's footsteps running through the night, though he never saw her face. Cole claimed he was ambushed, though his story changed with each retelling. The sheriff wrote off the incident as a robbery gone wrong, but nobody believed that, not with the precision of the wound, not with the echoes of old fear rising like smoke from ash. The whispers spread like wildfire. She's back. Whether true or not, the idea alone stirred the territory into a restless fever. Men who once mocked the notion of her survival began locking their doors at night. Younger women, those who had grown up hearing stories of her trials, walked with new confidence. Some even practiced defensive cuts on straw bales in secret, using kitchen knives or sharpened sticks. Tension thickened, anxiety sharpened, hope quietly bloomed. And then came the night that confirmed everything. A traveler heading north from Boonville claimed he was resting beneath a sycamore when a woman approached him near midnight. She asked only one question: "Do you know if Judge Barrow's letter was received?" The traveler said yes, having read the rumors himself. She nodded once, stepped back into the darkness, and said, "Then my work is done here." He swore he disappeared into the trees like smoke rising from dying embers. When asked later to describe her, he named the scar, the posture, the quiet voice. But it wasn't the description that mattered. It was the next detail. She walked toward Kansas territory, not east, not south. She was heading north. Kansas, land of free soil, abolitionist strongholds and bleeding conflict. If she had gone there, she was no longer hiding. She was moving towards something far larger. Over the next few months, unverified but persistent reports placed her near Osawatomie, then Lawrence, then along the trading routes near Council Grove. Each time the description matched: a small woman, a scar, a straight back, a quiet that made men uneasy. Some abolitionists claimed she assisted in escorting families toward the Nebraska border. One Quaker woman swore that Eliza spent a single winter night in her attic reading by lantern light, leaving before dawn with a scarf the woman had knitted for her. A runaway enslaved girl testified many years later that a woman matching Eliza's description guided her through tallgrass prairie, telling her, "Freedom is not a place. It is a decision you must remake every day." But none of these accounts were ever verified. Then came the final confirmed sighting. Autumn 1858, near the Flint Hills. A group of traders saw a woman standing alone on a rise overlooking miles of pale grass, waving like an ocean. She carried no bags, no companions, just a small bundle wrapped in cloth, likely all she owned. The traders called out to her, offering water, food, direction. She smiled, quietly, almost knowingly. "I have everything I need," she said. When they asked her name, she gave the same answer she had once given to a courtroom filled with men ready to condemn her. "My name does not matter, only what I did." And she walked west, toward open land, toward a horizon no court could claim, toward a life no man would ever take from her again. After that day, she vanished completely. No more sightings, no letters, no rumors strong enough to hold weight. Just silence.
Years passed. The Civil War cracked the country open. The frontiers shifted.
Towns rose and fell, rivers changed course, and those who once spoke her name with trembling lips aged and died. But the story of Eliza Carr did not fade. It drifted across state lines and generations, whispered in cotton fields, told in low voices around campfires, retold by grandmothers rocking slowly on wooden porches as children leaned in close to listen. Her name became a lesson, a warning, a prophecy. Some placed her firmly in Kansas territory, saying she lived among abolitionists, teaching women to protect themselves long before the war made such knowledge necessary. Others insisted she went farther west, into Colorado, into New Mexico, maybe even into California, vanishing into wilderness that welcomed the forgotten. One persistent rumor claimed she joined a community of free black farmers near the Arkansas River, using a false name, hair grayed with age, her scar the only link to the past she'd outrun. But some stories were darker. Some claimed she returned secretly to Arkansas in the final years before the war, slipping between counties, appearing only at night when a woman called out for help. A shape in the doorway, a whisper in the dark, a shadow that moved like it knew every tree, every creek, every hiding place carved from the land. These stories spoke of Eliza as a spirit, not a woman, an avenging force that arrived when danger did, leaving behind only silence and the fear of men who once believed themselves untouchable. No one ever proved any of it, but proof was never the point. Because while the world debated whether she lived or died, something more powerful happened, something she had never set out to create but inevitably did. Women changed, not through revolt, not through open defiance, but through a quiet knowledge passed hand to hand, whispered sister to sister, mother to daughter, knowledge of how to stand straighter, how to say no without saying a word, how to use their bodies, their instincts, their minds to survive what the world forced upon them.
Long after Eliza disappeared, after Judge Barrow died and his papers were sealed in a trunk beneath his daughter's bed, after plantation owners lost their grip on the land they once ruled, the stories persisted. And with every retelling, the shape of the legend sharpened. That little muslin square she stitched for the judge, preserved decades later by his descendants, became a relic. Women folded scraps of cloth the same way and passed them quietly to friends during dangerous times, not as weapons, as promises. One journalist, writing in 1887 after interviewing dozens of elderly Arkansans who remembered the trials, wrote this line: "Eliza Carr was not a rebel. She changed nothing by force, but she changed everything by refusing to bow." In the 1890s, a historian researching frontier court cases came across her name buried in dusty ledgers and scribbled notes. He interviewed the grandchildren of women Eliza had once helped, piecing together fragments of lives marked by fear, resilience, and quiet defiance. The historian wrote that her impact was like a stone dropped in a pond, small at first, but its ripples touched every shoreline. Still, no one knew what became of her. Not until 1903. That year, a family in Kansas discovered a handwritten book while renovating an old cabin near the Flint Hills. The book was wrapped in cloth, tucked behind a loose board in the wall. Its cover was plain, worn smooth by decades of dust. Inside were pages of careful handwriting, notes on anatomy, drawings of pressure points, diagrams of defensive movements, detailed instructions written in a calm, deliberate hand. There was no name. But at the back of the book was a small square of muslin stitched with familiar, unmistakable precision. And beneath it, a single line: "Freedom is the courage to protect what is yours, your body, your mind, your spirit." The cabin belonged, records later showed, to a free black woman who settled there in the 1860s. She had taken a new name when she arrived, one never linked to any census before that year. a name that didn't appear in Arkansas records. That was as close as anyone would ever come to finding her. Over the next century, her legend grew further, told in Southern households, dramatized in newspapers, whispered in women's shelters, written into the margins of local histories. Teachers recounted the tale to students studying frontier law. Quilters stitched her symbol into patchwork patterns. Writers folded her quiet defiance into stories of survival and justice. And yet, for all the myths and imaginings, one thing remained constant. Nobody ever proved Eliza Carr's death. Not a grave, not a death certificate, not a witness account verified by more than one person. And maybe that's fitting, because Eliza was never meant to be claimed by one place, one era, one story. She belonged to every woman who ever hid a bruise, every girl who ever walked alone at night with keys between her fingers, every survivor who ever refused to be broken. She became something larger than her trials, larger than the fear she instilled in men who misused power, larger than the reputation carved into courthouse records. She became a symbol, a warning, a quiet revolution. And even now, when the Arkansas River runs low in dry seasons and the cottonwoods whisper in the wind, old folks in certain counties swear they've seen her walking along the riverbanks, not young, not old, just present, watching. A reminder that the most dangerous woman Arkansas ever feared wasn't dangerous because she fought back. She was dangerous because she taught others they could too. And that, more than anything she ever said or did, is why her name, changed, lost, forgotten in official documents, still lives where truth matters most, in the stories we whisper when the world grows quiet.